I wish I had some better news for you tonight, folks, but I tell you what, frankly, it's all looking a little bit grim. All right, look, it's not all grim, and I'll get to the good news in a moment, but first, we got to have a look at some basic facts of the matter now that we are a couple of weeks into a second Labor term, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese can no longer go out there claiming that, well, the only reason things are running off the rails is because we in Labor, as they're so fond of saying, are just cleaning up the mess left to us by the coalition. Which was, of course, basically the line that they ran with for the past 3 years.
The mess that we inherited.
There is a lot of mess to clean up.
Another mess that the Albanese government has to clean up.
Cleaning up the mess of what those opposite left.
Ah, yes, but now it's clean up on aisle elbow now, and somehow the coalition, though, were not able to counter all of that stuff about the mess at the last election. But hey, we move on. The facts are what they are, and they are grim. We know that Australia's overall GDP is plateauing. On a per capita basis, we're going backwards again for the 9th out of the last 11 quarters. Businesses are undertaking what can only be called a capital strike, meaning that they find our highly regulated economy simply not worth the risk of pumping more money into in terms of investment. And in terms of productivity improvements, which should allow us to create more wealth with less work, well, guess what? They're nowhere to be seen. So, given this set of circumstances, the ordinary person might think that the nation's treasurer would be doing everything in his power to get out of this malaise and reset the economy to boom. But no, that's not the Jim Chalmers way. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has instead decided that this is the hill he wishes to die on instead, taxing the unrealized gains of the nation's top-tier superannuation accounts, which is where, I have to say, the good news comes in. You see, because yesterday at this time, there was a little bit of concern that the coalition, under the kinder and gentler Susan Ley and Shadow Treasurer Ted O'Brien, might decide to attempt some sort of negotiation with the government, to put to bed all the old sledges by Albo about the no-alition, and that they might try and instead soften the edges, work with Labor, put the policy through, but just simply soften the edge of this no-good, very bad policy that would open the door eventually to attacks by the government on the family home and Lord knows what other classes of assets. Well, that's not happening now. The coalition has formally enshrined its opposition to Labor's super tax after Susan Ley's shadow cabinet signed off on its first major policy position since Labor's landslide May 3 electorate victory. In a 1-hour virtual shadow cabinet meeting on Thursday morning, the first one convened since Ms. Ley and the Nationals leader David Littleproud decided to keep the marriage back together. Well, the meeting was dominated by discussions on the government's super tax plan. Here's a bit of what Ted O'Brien had to say a little bit after the meeting today.
Labor's super tax, it's super big, it's super bad. We will definitely, as a coalition, oppose this unfair super tax of Labor's every step of the way.
Thank you and hallelujah. This is exactly what the new party room should have decided. I just can't believe that it took them so long to do so. Now, the answer to the question why is very simple. See, luring the coalition into talks over the super tax, that was a trap Labor set for the new Shadow Treasurer Ted O'Brien, who we just saw there, and his party room, because Albanese's strategy was to try and neutralize them to become good faith consultants. But this is a position, of course, that would leave them to remain forever the bridesmaid come election day. The fact of the matter is that while it is fine for the opposition to negotiate with the government on policy that is broadly correct or helpful to the national interest, say if we were talking about defense or tax cuts or the like, well, Yeah, that's okay. Get together, work on it, be bipartisan. But let's also be frank, when it comes to this super tax, and again, you cannot reiterate enough how much this is not just about those people who happen to have $3 million socked away. It is about opening the door to all sorts of asset classes to pay for the government's profligate spending, which they have admitted will never come down and which is going to see us in deficits for the forward estimates for as long as the eye can see. Well, you know what? When it comes to this super tax, there is no way to roll in glitter something like this that is just so plain bad. Because even if instead Labor does go to the Greens, because they do have to go to the Greens to get it through the Senate, and they make it worse, well, the principle is what counts. And of course, it is principles that the coalition need to rediscover if they want to win office again on the coalition side. But we know all that. But stick with me here because there's something else I think fascinating going on here. And that is the split within Labor about how to deal with this. It's not just a coalition question, it's a Labor problem too. Now, on the Labor side, it has mostly been the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, ironically a creature of the Labor socialist left. You know, the guy who goes out and fights Tories because that's what he does. Well, it's Anthony Albanese who suggested that he was going to be a bit open possibly to working with the coalition. But it was Treasurer Jim Chalmers, who comes from the Labor right and wrote his thesis about Paul Keating, who is Mr. Crash through or crash on all of this. And that's because for the Treasurer Jim Chalmers, he's playing his own power games. I think you know what some of those are. And while he may have studied Keating, he learned his trade, the Treasury business, working for the big spending Wayne Swan, whose mineral mining resource red tax was the super tax of its day. Now, think back to those days. It was touted as going to be this big hit on those scary rich miners. But as with the super tax, the tax raised nowhere near as much as it promised. In fact, it cost the government money in its first year before it was eventually speared by Tony Abbott. Now, the same will likely be true of any super tax that the Labor-Green coalition manages to pass, as it drives investors to simply change behaviors to duck it. As with Labor's hostility to big miners, though, it's not really about the resources. It's not really about the revenue. No, we know what this is about. The super tax is about punishing well-off independent retirees, independent farmers, people like that, who have had, God help us, the temerity to accumulate wealth for themselves, for their own retirement and their family in a system designed by Paul Keating. And they didn't do what they were supposed to do, which is just hand their money over to a union-linked super fund to manage. Because remember, for Labor, it's not your money. No, it's all about your money giving them power.